Well, this is a story. Michael and Bridget Flanagan lived in a little farm, and they worked so very hard, but they seldom were able to make ends meet. Now, Bridget, she was a lovely woman. She really was. But she had one minor fault. Bridget could not keep a secret. If you told Bridget something at 8 o'clock in the morning, you could be assured that by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, every single person in the village would have heard all about it. Now, one day, Michael was out in the field. He was digging up the praties, the potatoes, and his spade hit something. Another rock, said Michael, and he started to shovel around it. But the spade kept hitting the rock. Well, this is some rock, said Michael. And so he went to dig it up. But when he unearthed it, it was not a rock. It was a pot. And when he lifted the lid of the pot, well, there were golden coins. And Michael said, oh, our troubles are over. And then he thought, oh no, what am I going to do about Bridget? The minute she finds out about this pot of gold, everybody in the county will know. And in no time at all, our greedy landlord will be here, and he'll take the pot of gold because he'll say, well, it was on my land. What am I going to do? Well, Michael sat there leaning on the handle of his spade, and he thought, I'll wait till she's asleep. Then I'll take the gold inside and I'll bury it under the flagstones of the fireplace. And that's exactly what he did. The minute Bridget began to snore, out into the field he went, dragged in the pot of gold, and began digging the flagstone in the fireplace. It was not a silent operation. And Bridget woke up, ran into the kitchen, saw her husband with the spade, and said, Michael Flanagan, what are you doing in the middle of the night? And then she saw the pot. And before Michael could stop her, she bent down, lifted the lid, and said, Michael, look at all that gold. Oh, Bridget, you can't tell anybody. Please, Bridget, promise me that you will not tell a living soul, because if our landlord finds out, he'll come and take the gold. Michael, I would never breathe a word of it, not to one single soul. And Bridget went to bed. Now, Bridget may honestly have believed that that was the truth. Do you think? No. Michael did not think it was the truth, and he sat up the entire night in that kitchen trying to come up with an idea to prevent Bridget from spilling the beans about the pot of gold. And when the sun came up that morning, Michael had a plan. The first thing he did was go into town, and he went right to the fishmonger's. And he bought a dozen speckled trout. And then he went to the baker's. And he bought 24 buns, raisin buns, and a half a dozen honey cakes. And the third thing he did was to see the butcher. And he bought a nice string of 3 fine, fat sausages. And then Michael went into the forest. And he took those 12 speckled trout, and he scattered them along the grass, right amidst the fresh fallen dew. And then he took the currant buns and the honey cakes and put them in the branches of the tree. And the last thing he did was to take those 3 sausages, tie them to a string, place them on a stick, and put them in the stream that ran at the edge of the forest. And then he ran home. And when he got inside his little cottage, there was Bridget stirring the porridge, and Michael looked at her and he said, "Bridget, put down your spoon. Why, we have to go fishing in the forest." "Michael, are you daft? Fishing in the forest?" "Yes, it's a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence, Bridget, but I swear to you, there are trout in the forest, swimming through the grass, and what's more, it's been raining buns and cakes all night." Well, Bridget grabbed her shawl, grabbed her basket, Michael grabbed his fishing pole, and off they went into the forest. And when they arrived, it was just as Michael had said. There in the dewy grass was a whole bunch of trout swimming. "Michael, you were right! Well, what an amazing thing." And Bridget scooped up all of those fish and put them into her basket. And when she looked up into the branches of the trees, "Michael, look! It's been raining buns and cakes all night, just like you said." And she climbed up into the trees and she took down all of the currant buns and the honey cakes, put those in her basket, and as they were walking along, Michael said, "Well, you know, it has been such an extraordinary day. Why don't I go fishing in the stream and see what I might catch?" And when he cast out his line and pulled it in, there dangling from the hook were 3 fine fat sausages. Well, they put all the things in the basket, went home, and Bridget cooked them the most magnificent breakfast they had had in quite some time. But do you think Bridget had forgotten about the pot of gold? No. In fact, that was what she told every single person she met that day, about how her husband had unearthed a pot of gold, which they now had in their house. In a week's time, everyone in the county had heard about Michael Flanagan and his pot of gold, including the landlord. And the landlord came to pay the Flanagans a visit. They were sitting at the table having a cup of tea when there was a knock at the door. Michael opened the door, and there was the landlord. They invited him in. He sat down, and he wasted no time getting right to the point. "Michael Flanagan, it has come to my attention that you happen to have a pot of gold that you unearthed on my land." "Well, where did you hear such a thing as that?" said Michael. "From your own wife. She's been telling everybody." "She has she? Well, now that's quite interesting. When do you suppose I found this hypothetical pot of gold? Why don't you ask her? Ask her when I'm supposed to have dug up this hypothetical pot of gold." And the landlord looked at Bridget. "Mrs. Flanagan, do you recall when your husband dug up the pot of gold?" "Now let me see," she said. "I do. Why, it was the night before we went fishing in the forest." "You went fishing in the forest?" "Oh, yes, the trout were running through the grass, and I just scooped them up. And you know, it was the same night that it had been raining cakes and buns all night long. Why, the trees were filled with them. And you know, another thing that was quite interesting about that day, when my husband went fishing, didn't he catch sausages? 3 of them." "Oh, fishing in the forest, raining cakes and buns, and sausages in the stream." And Michael leaned over and he said to the landlord, "You know, she's as crazy as a March hare. You can't pay attention to a word she says." "I see. Well, Mr. Flanagan, you have my sympathies. Good day to you, Mrs. Flanagan." And the landlord left. And that was how Michael Flanagan got to keep his pot of gold. And you know, after that, Bridget, she kept all of her secrets to herself. and never told a living soul. And that's the story of Michael and Bridget Flanagan.